and welcome back to Cammy's Corner and another installment of Harrowing Horror. This month I am introducing Edgar. He is now going to be holding each month's selection. He is named Edgar, of course, after Edgar Allan Poe, and he was named by Miss Stacy from Stacy's Stories. So thank you, Miss Stacy, for the inspiration. But I'm going to borrow that, Edgar, and let's jump right into this story. So this is Velocity by Dean Koontz. The story was written in 2005. It is not of the horror genre. It is more of a suspense, thriller, mystery, all of the above. The point of view is written in third person limited, which is pretty common for these types of fiction stories. The place setting starts off in Napa County, California. California is then mentioned several times throughout the story, but no specific cities are given. There's also a mention later in part 2 of Denver, Colorado. The year is assumed to be present day as it is written. It is comprised of about 460 pages, broken up into 77 chapters and broken down into 3 parts. The price range can be anywhere from minimal cents. This copy, thanks Stacy, is 38 cents to me, so it was a part of my birthday package, which I loved. And typically can be found at used bookstores for about $1 or $2. If you are in the market of collecting books, you can get a pristine hardcover copy anywhere from about $20 to $25. So very affordable and readily available. And of course, depending on the format that you choose, the ISBN numbers will vary. I will provide, as always, in the descriptive, the ISBN number to the particular one that I possess. And the writing style is informal. Now this particular book opens up with 2 quotes, one from Ernest Hemingway from The Old Man and the Sea and another from T.S. Eliot. Now you'll find throughout this book it's laden with the poetry of T.S. Eliot. I'm not really for certain why the author chose to go that route. I wasn't able to find any descriptive as to why, other than perhaps he just himself enjoys the poet. There is at the end of the book a note that kind of breaks down, in a sense, a weak works cited page of the various quotes and where they come from, or the various lines out of the poetry and their original origin. So if you're interested in that, of course, you can go back and you can get that information. So let's kind of break down this book, and I will do my best to stay within the parts and not jump all around. But this book, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of stories within stories, and I particularly am not very fond of that type of writing style, but I'll get into my feelings of this book at the end. So part 1 is pages 3 to 118, comprised of chapters 1 through 16, and is titled The Choice is Yours. Part 2 is pages 121 through 317, comprised of chapters 17 through 51, and is titled Are You Prepared for Your Second Wound? And lastly, part 3, pages 321 to 458, comprised of chapters 52 through 77, and that is entitled All You Have Is How You Live. So we're going to kind of break this down into a multitude of characters, as there is many characters within the book, not all of which are important and not all of which are fully developed. We have our main protagonist, which is Billy Wiles, and Billy is normal per se, but he had a very tragic beginning. So what appeared to be, I guess, a normal childhood up until the age of 14, and then we are later described an instance in which Billy is awoken from an erotic dream and comes into the kitchen. There is an argument that is transpired between his dad and his mom. His dad is essentially calling his mom out, saying that she is nothing short of a whore. She's not exactly denying those allegations. She seems to be admitting to her faults, to which Billy is trying to get in the middle and just cease the argument. That rage and aggression within his father then reverts to Billy, and Billy is somehow now the new focal point or the new target, because his dad pretty much refers to him as a bastard, or at least questions whether or not he is in fact his son. That invokes not so much a rage within Billy, but it's more of a sadness that I don't think is ever revisited or ever really gone through. I don't think he ever got over that, but he does find that as the source of continuing on and just surviving through life. So long story short, there is the continued altercation between the parents. His father has laid out instruments on the table, one of which is a knife, the other is a wrench, and lastly a revolver. This is kind of a way of taunting his mother, basically giving her fear that he at any point could end her life and she doesn't know how it's going to happen. Billy tries to interject into this argument, and at which point his father has then picked up one of the weapons, which is the wrench, and begins beating his mother senseless. Billy then reverts to the table and picks up the revolver. I don't believe that there was ever an intent to kill, and it's very obvious by the first 2 shots were misses, but he does end up shooting his father. So there is a chest wound to which has his father falling on the floor, and then his mother, at which point, is already almost incoherent. She is alive, she is regurgitating some words, but they're not coherent words, they're not an articulation of complete sentences. So between what's happening with his father and now knowing that his mother doesn't seem to be making it, Billy just kind of makes a judgment call. He does not wait for authorities to jump on the scene, and he then hears his mom start to call for her stepfather. Now her stepfather, from what he later again describes, is not a man that you would normally have called on in this type of situation, or really any type of situation. He wasn't a reliable figure, so he's not really sure where this is coming from. Perhaps just her psyche, and she's just, regurgitating things that are coming to her. He then decides to take matters into his own hands, kills his father, and kills his mother. So here we have the start of his life. He goes on to live with a family known as the Olsons, and in this family there is a older boy who he doesn't really see as a brother figure, he sees more as an uncle figure, and he goes by the name of Lanny. So Lanny and him over time develop a friendship, and he does consider himself to be a friend to Billy, and Billy also considers him obviously a friend, but he's referred many times to as the best friend. So there's not a lot of development of their relationship. There's a lot of look backs as far as things that they did as kids and so forth, but you really don't know how good of a friendship they had. Both in and of their rights are kind of recluses. They're very introverted individuals. They don't seem to interact in society. Now Billy, of course, as we discover through his story, and the story really does develop the main characters pretty well. Billy has a fiance who, unfortunately, to add to his obscure life, is also in a coma. She opens a can of soup, and this soup, which is the vichyssoise, happens to have a contamination on the metal, and that this contamination falls a bacteria which sends her into a coma. Now there is kind of a lighthearted addition to that story where she ends up saving the lives of like 5 or 6 other people because of her misfortune, but Billy doesn't seem to believe that that somehow is a positive. Well, this ends up bringing into a lawyer, bringing a lawyer into the situation, Harry Avarkian, and Harry kind of, I guess, is kind of a strong arm of the law, and he alleviates this from really going into depth into trial, so gets them a lot of money. This money allots to keep Barbara on a life support system, and unfortunately not everybody has that same availability, but I'm pretty sure this is why Billy chose to keep her on life support for as long as he has, because at this point, from what's described in the narrative, it's about 4 years in. A lot of stories within stories. Even at the beginning of our story, we have a bar patron, as Billy himself is a bartender. He is also a writer, but from the descriptive hasn't really touched writing or his computer in about 4 years. So that would pretty much take it back to the time that Barbara was comatose and went into the Whispering Pines home. So he's more so a bartender than he is a writer. But we have a bar patron at the bar having a beer by the name of Ned Persall. Ned is going on about this story with a neighbor that he had by the name of Henry Friddle, and Henry was up on his roof urinating on his window as a retaliation from when Ned urinated on his window when Henry and his wife were having dinner, and ends up falling off the roof and killing himself on a lawn gnome. So a lot of descriptive, like I said, a lot of story within story, but he's telling the story kind of in a drunken state, and there happens to be another individual there. This person is referred to as the stranger. Now, far be it from me, you know, I spoil all the books that I read, but maybe it's the fact that I watch a lot of B-list type mystery movies on the Hallmark Channel, but this guy had killer written all over him for me from the beginning. Stranger in town, and then he's very cavalier and very passé as he starts to talk to Billy at the bar. He's kind of interacting with Ned, but you can tell his focus and focal point is that of Billy. He even says, "You're an interesting guy there, Billy Barkeep." Really? That cheesy tagline, I mean, really? So it's apparent he's done some work, you know, he knows a little bit more about this guy. To make a statement like that, you're kind of calling out the story, but that maybe again, that's just me. And this is not exactly my favorite style of writing, where there is so much descriptive and a good majority of it doesn't have to do with the main story. So we're introduced to our stranger, which, as we know later, then turns into this gentleman by the name of Vallis, who is a local artist who has interest in this bar. Now, this bar is called the Tavern. It is by directive of Jackie O'Hara, the owner, a family bar, whatever the hell that is. And his sights are set on this bar, which makes sense as to why he's having a Heineken in the bar, because there is a mural that he's going to be doing across the street, a sort of art project, if you will. Early on, we're also introduced to other bartenders, Ivy and Steve. Steve, of course, as we know, holds a much larger part in the middle and end of the story, as well as Ivy. She's kind of a main character, but in a side sense. We have some cooks. So there's a lot of introduction of these useless characters. During the course of his shift, he then, of course, gets off, goes to the parking lot, and he finds a note on his car. Now, for most of us, we find a note, it's usually an advertisement or, you know, some kind of sale that's going on, and he assumes it's going to be the same. Well, it ends up being one of a series of notes that is going to come into his life and really alter his existence as he knows it. So, note one that he finds on his vehicle. Now Billy is stricken with a choice. He either does nothing at all and a school teacher will lose her life. If he does in fact take this information to the police, then an elderly woman loses her life. Now, he doesn't think much of this at first because he thinks more than anything it's probably just a prank, and he immediately looks to Steve, who Steve, as we know, Steve Zillis is who I'm referencing. He's another fellow bartender at the tavern. He's kind of a cocky individual. He has a very annoying catchphrase during the book. He always refers to people as Kimosabe. I don't know why that word has always bothered me. I just think Keanu Reeves when I hear that word, and I just hear that kind of surfer dude kind of vibe. But I didn't like Steve off the bat. So he assumes it's Steve that has left this note on his car, so he doesn't take it seriously. A couple days go by, he finds out, in fact, a school teacher has died, but he thinks perhaps it's still just coincidence. So this is early on, page 18, part 1, that he gets the first note. By page 56, same part, we're still in part 1, he gets another note on his vehicle after another shift. And now he is again given a choice. Now, with the first note, he is given 6 hours to make a decision. With the second note, he loses an hour and is only given 5. So in this, he either chooses to not get the police involved and an unmarried man who won't be missed by the world is killed, or secondly, he takes it to the police and a young mother of 2 will be killed. This is where his emotions start to play into this, because for him, an unmarried man who won't be missed by anyone in the world is not a big deal. But a mother of two, that could potentially not only lead to perhaps her children witnessing the killing of their mother, but orphans, and then perhaps even the killing of the children in and of themselves if they're in the wrong place at the wrong time. So he makes a decision at this point to ensure he doesn't take it to the police, because he doesn't want a young mother to be killed. He doesn't want that to be weighed on his conscience. So this is page 56, part 1. He does, however, at that point choose to take the 2 notes that he's received thus far and at least let Lanny, his best friend and confidant from childhood, know what's going on. Maybe I'm not crazy, maybe I'm not thinking too much into this, maybe it wasn't coincidence that that school teacher just happened to die. I need to get some perspective on this. Now, the story kind of lost credibility for me at that point, because I'm immediately asking myself on page 54, whoa, he's taking these notes to Lanny. Lanny is in fact a deputy working for the police department. That's taking it to a cop. Well, a few pages after that, you know, somewhere between 58 and like 65, it is explained that they did not see it that way. The killer did not see it that way, because Lanny didn't really take the notes to the substation or to a higher up within the police department to start investigating these murders or the killer or any such thing. He just kind of kept them to himself. Now, he did that for personal reasons, and really those personal reasons to alleviate anything from infracting his job or his position turned out to be the reason why he was in fact killed. So we know going into the latter part of part 1, Lenny Olsen is unfortunately the victim. That is the unmarried man who will not be missed by the world. He led kind of a solemn life. He wanted to not really be a cop. He only went that way because, as it's later described in the book, there was tin in his blood, and he felt that that was the thing that he was supposed to do. But he really wanted to be a cartoonist. And I laughed, and I probably shouldn't have, because murder is not funny, but I thought it was humorous that the killer left Mickey Mouse-like hands leading to the body. Again, I know it's cruel, but I just found that quite humorous because it was a great visual leading to Lanny. So we find Lanny in his home, and Steve at this point is now quite nervous, because Steve, although knowing Lanny hadn't really done anything with this case, he really hadn't taken it a step further, he knew that Lanny at least had resources. He could look into things. He could use the cop database to ensure that he could get inside information, perhaps investigate potential suspects. Up to this point, really the only suspect in Billy's mind was that bartender, that crazy zany bartender, Steve Zillis. And he does give off all the quirky signs that he's weird, but you really don't get a sense that he might be a complete nut job until the next note appears. So with our next note, we have, or I should say our next series of notes. With our next note, Billy then gets into his SUV. He's kind of trying to figure out now, all right, I can't just easily dispose of this body. Lanny also, when he's found, he's very clean, so he clearly wasn't killed in his own home, but he was taken back to his home. So he is set upstairs in a chair with a book, and inside the book is a Polaroid of the first victim. And our first victim, as indicated, was a school teacher, and she goes by the name of Giselle Winslow. You do see later that the Polaroid resurfaces when there is a mention of this unknown redhead. So we'll get there in just a minute. So there is a series of Polaroids. For me, I'm thinking Polaroids are again another form of art. So Billy gets into his SUV, and inside his SUV, he sees a unfolded up note, unfolds it, reads it, and the note says, "Are you prepared for your first wound?" What could that mean? Okay, now it's personal. So Billy starts to feel this is getting real. Now, whoever this sick SOB is he's coming after me and now he wants to cause me bodily harm. So how is he going to wound me? That's when our story finally picks up. We finally get some juice. So at that point, even though Billy has already looked around the interior of the SUV and told himself out loud, nobody could possibly fit in here, he doesn't see anybody, he gets this sensation in the back of his head where somebody has got a good grip of his hair and is pulling so tightly, it makes me cringe. He says he feels so much intense pain that he just wishes his hair would fall out. He's hoping that happens, but it doesn't. That is used as the source to pull his head to the side, shatters the driver's side window, and that knocks him unconscious. Billy finds that when he awakens, he is now in the comfort of his own home, but he is pretty beaten up. He's got the wound from the shattering of the glass, in addition to 3 fish hooks in his eye. Now we know that Billy, as it's explained later, is a fisherman, so the fish hooks make sense. Billy does not see the need to take himself to the hospital because how are you going to explain that you got 3 very precise fish hooks in your eyelid or in your eyebrow area? And furthermore, he doesn't want to cause any speculation because he's starting to get nervous that this trail is building. And I'll give it to this killer and I'll give it to the writing style of Dean Koontz. That was fabricated very well. That the intricacy of Vallis and Billy's trail really was one and the same, and he didn't leave a lot of options for Billy to have an out. So I did appreciate that portion of the writing. Billy is now in his home. He, for whatever reason, gravitates to the desk that has the computer in which he hasn't turned on in 4 years and decides to go ahead and turn this computer on and notices a series of folders. He doesn't go to the folders right away. He actually gets up, goes into the kitchen, and in the kitchen there is a note. And on the note, he immediately crumbles it up and throws it away. Has no notion that he's going to go back to the note. Decides that that might not be the best decision. Now I want to halt there for a second before I get into the next series of things, because that's going to open up a whole Pandora's box for us. We are introduced to another portion of our protagonist's life. There is a explanation of Miss Barbara Mandel. I had an issue with that name too. It took me back to the 80s. There was a well-known singer, actress, Barbara Mandel. I just could not get her face out of my head, even though I'm desperately trying to envision this much younger, comatose woman. It was very difficult for me, so bad name writing there. But Barbara, as we know, as I stated, gets a hold of this bad soup, so she's in a coma. But we also kind of get a backstory, a little bit more about her. So she also has an estranged sister by the name of Deidre, and Deidre is kind of following in their mom's footsteps. So she and Deidre are fraternal twins. She goes on, obviously, to have a much more productive life. She does at some point, I believe when they reach the age of 21, because they do get separated through foster care, reach out to her sister. Her sister is kind of a party girl, very drug-induced, sees her as very bland and very boring, so wants nothing to do with her, until she comes into this comatose state. Then, of course, all she sees is dollar signs. Well, that takes us to the lawyer, Harrowing. He's kind of always in the background, just watching over their estate. So we know that Barbara is always kind of the source of his motivation. He doesn't really have a lot to live for. Obviously, being a bartender and a mediocre writer, he just kind of comes and goes, and Barbara is the one thing that he feels he can go to, and it's a constant for him. Even though she's not coherent and she may not even ever wake up, that is his motivation to just keep going, to be better, to better himself. Flashback to the kitchen and the crumpled up note. So now he makes the decision, no, I need to go ahead and read this. So he flattens out the note, and the note on the fridge states, so we now have a new character that comes into play, the associate, Ralph Cottle. Now Ralph is a drunk. He is fearful of this freak, as he is referred to by Billy. He wants nothing to do with this. He just gives him the timeline, and it's a 10-minute timeline. You've got 5 minutes to make a decision, and I've got 5 minutes to make a phone call. So you see up to this point with the notes that there is still a cognizant understanding that things have to be done a systematic way. It was within this time that for the first time we see our protagonist take a little bit longer than the allotted time. So he takes about 7 minutes to make the initial decision. Ralph goes into the house to make the phone call but never comes out. So unfortunately, Ralph is now yet another victim. So we have Giselle Winslow, the teacher, is dead. Lanny Olson is dead. And we now have Ralph Cottle, who is dead. Ralph really isn't someone who's going to be terribly missed because he doesn't seem to have any family. He goes through his wallet and finds very little information on him. He happens to just decide that it's a good idea to go ahead and leave a body in his house. So he leaves Ralph in the house, but decides, I need to come up with plan B, because the note indicates he can't go to work. He has to stay home. If he doesn't stay home, a child will die. So at this point, he calls the tavern. Jackie, the owner, happens to be working. He tells Jackie, hey, you know what? Sorry, I've kind of got this stomach thing. I won't be able to make it in today. To which Jackie starts talking about Steven for whatever reason, and kind of goes a little bit more into depth because of a personal irritation that he has with him, and that is he likes to take cherries, put them in his mouth, and tie the stems of the cherries with his tongue to impress women in the bar. And he sees that as theft, petty theft, but he wants him to somehow pay back for these cherries. So they get into this random conversation about, well, how are you really gonna account for how much these cherries cost? And then he proceeds to tell him, you know, I heard this story one time from his neighbor that he likes to chop up watermelons and mannequins in his backyard. So that's a clear indicator, okay, this guy's a little weird. Whoa, why are you gonna chop up mannequins? Because chopping up mannequins is kind of like chopping up people. So my head is spinning at this point. I already don't like the character Steve Zillis, and I still have that stranger in the background. I'm really not sure if there's a connection at this point, but I know that both are to be watched. However, with all these descriptives going on, at this point you're starting to think, well, it could be a multitude of characters. It could be Steve, it could be Ralph, it could be Barbara's sister. So you start analyzing these, and then you even think, well, maybe it could be that really weird cop that Billy referred to back from when he murdered his parents by the name of John Palmer. So you have all these thoughts going in through your head. So he decides to stay home, and now he's looking at the computer. And on the computer, there is a series of folders. Within these folders, they are kind of a breakdown as to what the next steps are in the course of this crazed killer madman. The folders are labeled why, how, and when. Why states, because I too am a fisher of men. So then you possibly start to take your mind and wander, is this a religious thing? Is this, you know, some kind of weird cult-like thing? That quickly dissipates, and then you get into the how. Now the how is just kind of a series of descriptive words which we later learn have a purpose. So you have cruelty, violence, and death, which we learn is the performance. We have movement, velocity, and impact, which we learn are the techniques. And impact is then later removed and freedom is put in its place, as well as flesh, blood, and bone, which is our medium. When he gets to the when states a note of sorts that is kind of his next instruction. My last killing, midnight Thursday, your suicide soon after. This is on page 232, chapter 32. So now I'm starting to get a little bit concerned. Okay, so all this builds up, all this craziness, and is it really going to come down to Billy committing suicide? I mean, he killed his parents. He had this whole dramatic situation with that. His wife or fiance is in a coma, and we're going to end up with a suicide. And here we have yet another story within a story. So I kind of have actually two things to button up. Up to this point, our protagonist Billy has actually received a couple of phone calls from said killer. They haven't really amounted to much, mostly heavy breathing and kind of Billy piecing, you know, these things together. Well, he's sitting here now in front of the computer contemplating the note and contemplating these Word documents that he's discovered on his computer, full well knowing he in fact didn't write them. So it's pretty apparent the killer has now been in his home, which is creepy in and of itself. And he's starting to piece together, this is a lot more skilled than I thought. I have to give this guy credit because he has basically allotted every way for me to either entangle myself and look like the perpetrator and the assailant here, or if I attempt to dispose of any of this evidence, that's going to exonerate any guilt on the behalf of the party of this killer. So that part was also well crafted and well written. The phone rings once again. So Billy, thinking that of course it's the freak again, the killer as he calls him, the freak, answers the phone, to which the woman on the other end replies, "Who am I speaking to?" Billy, thrown aback, "Hey, you called me, who am I speaking to?" So she identifies herself as a Napa County Sheriff's Department dispatcher for 911, stating that there was just a 911 call received from the house. So in all of the commotion and everything that's been going on with the note that he received from the associate and the associate dying and him trying to figure out, okay, I have yet to get back to Lanny to discover how I'm going to, you know, button up that situation. Now I have another body to dispose of. And now this phone call. Who called 911? Oh crap, he's in the house. So he cleverly, and I have to give him credit because he is quite witty and he thinks on his feet, indicates, you know, it was just an oversight on my part. My intent was to dial information at 411. I accidentally dialed 911, and in, you know, anticipation of it going through, I just immediately hung up thinking that it had not connected. Unfortunately, since you're calling me, obviously it did. So she does her due diligence as a dispatcher and she ensures to have this conversation, which, I mean, it seems like it goes on for many pages, but it's probably only a couple of minutes long. She's just kind of ensuring that everything is okay, because that is their responsibility. In case the person is under any type of duress or a stressful situation, they perhaps have, you know, a loaded gun to their head or something, they have an opportunity to maybe hear it in their voice or say something that might elude them that they are in fact in trouble. But he's very, you know, calm and cool, collected, cool as a cucumber, as they say, and he advises her that, you know, Rosalind, everything is okay. And she seems to know him personally, not intimately or anything of that nature, but she does reference his job at the tavern, that she needs to stop by again. It's been a while since she's been there. So they have this elongated conversation. Well, at some point between that phone call going out and it getting back into the station, they must have dispatched a couple of sergeants in the area, because as he's kind of collecting his thoughts with the intent to head to Lanny's house to not only now dispose of Cottle's body, but figure out what he's going to do with Lanny, he opens the door. Thank God he doesn't have the body prepared in his hand or something, and immediately is greeted by not one, but two sergeants from Napa County Sheriff's Office, Sergeant Napolitano and Sergeant Sobieski. So here we have yet again another story within a story. So they proceed to interrogate him for a few minutes, again just ensuring that he's not under duress. At this time he's very clever, very quick on his feet. He proceeds to keep the story intact from when he just got off the phone telling Rosaline about, and this then leads him to just kind of stay steady in the house until the sergeants take off. It actually takes them a while to displace from his house. So fast forward to him finally being able to leave the, you know, privacy of his home. The sergeants finally take off. He has the body wrapped in a tarp, puts it in the back of the SUV, heads over to Lonnie's house. So the plan is to dispose of both Cottle as well as Lonnie in this lava pit as it's described in the book, and this is gonna allot for him to be able to kind of rid himself of the situation, because no matter how he slices it, the evidence still points back to him in both instances for Lonnie's death as well as Cottle's death. In this instance, when he disposes of the bodies, he goes back to the kitchen kind of in an OCD format, just kind of going over his steps again and again, ensuring that he hasn't left any fingerprints behind, any evidence that, again, could point the fingers back at him. There's some alcohol also on the counter that Lonnie was drinking prior to his death, and he doesn't want it to appear as though he was under any type of stress or any kind of mental situation that caused him to drink and possibly look like he committed suicide. So he does save his friend's reputation in that sense. And as he's going back through the motions, cleaning up after himself, he goes and picks up his weapon and his wallet to dispose of all this, decides he's going to go ahead and keep a revolver, he's going to keep the taser, as well as his cell phone. Just for safekeeping, he might need those later. As he goes back into the living room, and at this point he's already disposed of Cottle's body in the lava pit, his intent is now to go back, collect Lonnie, and dispose of his body. He runs right into the body of Ralph Cottle, sitting straight up on the couch. Again, another freak out point. Finally, the story gets good again. You're thinking, oh crap, how did this happen? And then, whoa, wait, he did throw a body down to the lava pit. So who was in the tarp? So then you start getting this apprehension and anxiety, thinking, oh my gosh, that could be a number of people. You're thinking maybe it's Barbara. You're thinking, you know, who knows what you're thinking at this point. But I know that I thought of a couple different people, as well as the fact that he's very much obsessed with disposing of women and so forth. So it could have just been a random woman. We find out later it is. With the discovery of Cottle being back in the home, he then of course discovers the killer is in fact in Lonnie's home, and that's when we kind of go into part 2, where instead of a note this time it is a voice. So for the first time there is a voice hearing, and he overlooks now Billy, who's sprawled out on the floor, and says, are you ready for your second wound? So this wound happens very swiftly. It's almost just a test to kind of say, hey, I'm still here, I'm still in charge. So he ends up taking a nail gun and nailing down Billy's hand to the floor, which happens to be made of wood. He eventually gets himself loose, but yet again, that is one more wound that he has to tend to. So more alcohol, more hydrogen peroxide, and then he puts some liquid Band-Aid on it. So all of these things are starting to add up, because at some point, if he does not seek medical attention for these things, that could prevent him from being able to hold a weapon properly, or inevitably self-defend himself in a situation where he comes up against the killer. He then proceeds to manage to get through that, gets his wounds dressed, grabs Lonnie's personal effects, finally does dispose of Cottle properly, still curious as to whom else he threw down the lava pit, gets Lonnie taken care of, grabs the items, and goes back to his house. In this transfer, having Lonnie's phone, he had done some research between part 1 and part 2, just trying to kind of get a little bit more information on Steve and see if Zillis had some kind of a past, see if there was any trail that led up to it. He came across a story that somehow intrigued him and kind of fit all of the pieces, and that was the story of Judith Kesselman. Now, attached to her case, which was open for many years and it was unsolved, we have the name of Detective Ramsey Osgard, who is part of the Denver PD. He calls this guy, looks up his number through information, so there was a real call to 411, gets the information for Ramsey Osgard, speaks to him, who is very much willing to speak on this case because it seems to be very near and dear to his heart. As he says, he loves this girl, but again, not in a romantic way or a passionate way, as if she was his own daughter. He just wants to get this case solved and really know what happened to this girl. Billy seems to believe that she is very much a part of this, being that there is some kind of a trail that he's following. and he poses as Lonnie over the phone. So he says, you know, he was a cop and he was looking for information regarding the case, to which Detective Osgard provides him with a great amount of information that allows him to be able to kind of link some pieces with Steve. So now we go to Steve. Billy in this instance has some free time where he's able to see that Steve is working at the tavern, goes to Steve's house while he's working, breaks in, goes through a series of keys, finds a spare key to the house, and then later goes back and visits Steve. When he visits Steve, it's more like an interrogation. He kind of scares the living bejesus out of him and tries to get information regarding the information he received from Jackie about the watermelons, the mannequin, the pornography that he found under the bed, the type of S&M pornography he saw when he walked into his apartment. So there's a lot of questions he has. Steve is very well trained because he basically talks himself out of the situation and plays the victim. He makes it seem as though Billy is the one that has the issues, he's the one that's crazy, and there's nothing wrong with him. Yeah, he likes a little bit of perverse things that are a little bit odd and obscure. He has a few what appear to be fetishes with hands and feet and other such parts, but it's nothing obscure. It's normal in his world. He needs to iron things out, so to speak. There is a short discussion about a mutual friend that they have that Steven has went out on a couple of dates with, to which Billy's send off is don't call her, don't talk to her. He does have him call the girl during the course of this interrogation just to ensure that his alibi is tight, and it does pan out. She's kind of fawning over, oh no, I'm still awake and thinking about our date, da, da, da. And she does verify all the points that Billy is looking for. Now he does have him handcuffed to the railing of his bed, so he doesn't really leave him in a situation to where he can easily escape, but inevitably he does advise him that the keys to the handcuffs are downstairs. He just needs to find a way to make his way downstairs to retrieve the key so that way he can be set free. Billy, come on, really? I did not believe that. Even the way the storyline was written, Steve was sappy, he was whiny. There was just very obvious dialogue to me that he was lying. Again, maybe it's the cheesy Hallmark movies, but I didn't buy it for an instant. But we now have what we think is laid to rest with the Steven situation. Now that takes us to really the final interaction with Valis, and we have these weird interactions at this truck stop. There is some conversation and this talk of this mural again about the across the street from the tavern, and so at which point Billy decides he needs to act, and he needs to act quickly. It kind of brings it to a head, and for me, the ending was just very rushed. So you have this situation where he goes back to the hospital thinking that the final victim is going to be his future wife, current fiance Barbara. So he goes back to Whispering Pines, to which there's a temporary blackout where Steve has found his way to the hospital, kidnapped Barbara with an attempt to take her from Whispering Pines. In a heroic effort, Billy somehow manages to get through the black abyss and finds Steve and beats the living daylights out of him, then gets rid of Steve in that instance, which then immediately takes us to the next scene where Steve is finally head-to-head with Valis. Now the conversation with Valis actually turns out to be very beneficial for Billy because he does learn some things about Barbara that he couldn't quite piece together previous. Barbara, as I stated, has some very incoherent thoughts and phrases that aren't really quite complete sentences. It turns out Valis has been studying Billy for a lot longer than he thought, in addition to Barbara. So he's read through the journal and he's made the connection to her gibberish to what Billy has written down in the notebook. Since Billy isn't well versed, or doesn't appear to be well versed in the arts or literature, Valis kind of puts the connecting pieces together, letting him know that a lot of the things that she says is based on the world of Dickens. So there is a Charles Dickens reference and a reference to several of his novels, and what she is saying is basically just kind of vicariously living through a Dickens world in her comatose state. There's a lot of symmetry to that with art, because in a lot of cases for me, at least personally, literature and art go hand in hand, just like with music. Everything is very symmetrical for me. And so I thought there was a great beauty in that writing style, mixing it all together. And it validated Valis to a point. It kind of gave him a moment of humanity. But at the end, as we're seeing the connection between Stephen and Valis, there's no mistaking the fact that they are both psychotic. They are both sociopaths with very weird fetishes for hands and feet. And having come face to face with Valis now, he's in his own world in this motorhome, and he has these obscure containers that have all of these hands and feet that have been missing off of these bodies. So it's a collection of sorts. These guys are much more sadistic than written in the story, and I don't think that that's highlighted. I think if Koontz had given them a little bit more of a sadistic outlook, I think for me, I would have inevitably rated this higher in the end. But between Billy and Valis, we know that Billy becomes the successor. He tases Valis and is able to get the revolver out of his hands, and with that he then turns the gun on Valis that was intended for him, shoots him and kills him. And again, the weak writing style of the end for me, the ending was just very rushed and very weak. We see then that there's somehow a connection between the information that Detective Osgard had given Billy posing as Lanny. So we think that possibly this body that was thrown down prior to Lanny and Caudle being thrown down was that of possibly Judith Kesselman, or one of the many women that this trail, because there's a trail that's spoken of linking Valis to Steve through South America, Asia, and even the Soviet Union. Come on, if you were going through that many countries, you mean to tell me not a single country could have made a solid case against these sadistic psychopaths, these sociopaths? I cannot believe that their trail was that clean. I don't know, I just have a really difficult time believing that there's this traveling artist and this art student who apparently Steve is very obsessed with Valis and the way he does things, and he's kind of like a sociopath in training, and nobody caught on to this until Billy. To me, it's kind of an unbelievable story. So we fast forward to the end where Barbara makes her way home, and she's kind of doing in-home care. She's no longer reliant on these machines. She hasn't quite woken up from a coma. She does have a moment of hopefulness where Billy and her are sitting outside, and she does pay attention to these birds and makes mention of seeing them and says that she likes them, and then appears to fall back into a deep coma. The characters from the beginning, the bartenders, the cooks, and so forth, do make their way back, because he starts to say how he finds it ironic that people started visiting and so forth. He appears to have just kind of come to a full circle, so to speak, and he seems content and happy and peaceful with his life. The highlight of the story for me was actually the kind of the encompassing quote that tied everything together for me, and that was, "We are haunted, and regardless of the architecture," because he talks about rebuilding the home that they're in, "with which we surround ourselves, our ghosts stay with us until we ourselves are ghosts." I thought that was very well written, so I very much enjoyed that. My least favorite part, after having read At the Mountains of Madness last month and now having read Velocity this month, I really want authors to stop trying to emulate bird sounds, because with the "killy to killy" in At the Mountains of Madness with Lovecraft, and now with the "killy killy" with Koontz, no, I am not there with you in nature. Those are ridiculous sounds, and that does not at all put me in nature with you. So authors, please stop trying to emulate birds, because you're not doing a really good job of it. To finalize this, if you like authors such as James Patterson, John Sowell, Stephen King, you would probably like this. For me, I'm going to give it the lowest rating that I've rated a book yet in this series. I'm giving it 2 stars. It was okay. It had a lot of flaws for me. I just didn't like all of the characters, all of the character development that was unnecessary with these small little plots within plots. So, 2 stars. All right, let's pick next month's book. Not looking, not looking, and we've got 1, yes, 1. All right, cool. It is, ooh, We finally reached Stephen King. The Stand. The Stand. And, oh, of course it would be at the bottom of my pile. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we've reached the man of the hour. That's a big book too. We've got 1,052 pages. 1 month. Let's get her done. Until next time, I'll see you real soon. Bye.